From 1943 on, the War Production Board, soon followed by the creation of the Committee for Economic Development, sponsored post-war planning for the United States. Towns, state governments, companies set up post-war planning officials. That was the title that appeared everywhere. There were vice presidents for post-war planning, assistants to governors for post-war planning, and it was pursued everywhere. In January 1969, one of the last official acts of President Lyndon Johnson was the economic report of the president, which included a major proposal complete with detailed data and budgeting for a peace dividend for the United States to replace the wartime expenditures in Vietnam. So the United States government is not a stranger to acting in a strong way to give leadership for alternatives to military economic activity following the end of hostilities. There is no comparable effort at the present time. In fact, the White House, the Department of Defense, and the relevant committees of the Congress have acted as though in a militant united phalanx to prevent even serious discussion of how to convert from military to civilian economy. It is one of the sad realities of our day that there is anxiety and fear in the United States in a fashion and with an intensity that is unprecedented in my memory, except for the few days of the Cuban Missile Crisis. There's not just a fear of loss of family, friends, unformulated fears of terrorism. There's also a fear of what comes after this war. Is there to be disarmament or a continuation of the arms race? Everyone can see that city budgets are being curtailed, that services to the people are being cut back, that education is in disrepair, that there are more homeless people on Broadway than during the Great Depression, that libraries are being shut down, that there is failure in health care, and that there is no leadership whatsoever from the major repository of capital funds in this society, namely the federal government, with respect to these matters. Indeed, the Congress negotiated with the federal executive an agreement with respect to budgets, which, if allowed to stand in place, would make it impossible to transfer funds from military account to the service of, to life-serving activities of all sorts. S&L debacles and the prospect of more bank failures are part of a no-future economy. That is not mitigated by poetry about 1,000 points of light, nor by proposals to transfer $15 billion of already underfunded programs to the various states, hence for them to raise taxes. There are wholesale layoffs taking place right now in various military industry locations. A month ago, I was present in Fort Worth, pure chance, at a conference on economic conversion. As the day before, Secretary Cheney announced the cancellation of the 812 contract, whereupon by midnight of that day, 3,500 men and women were laid off, together with the announced cutoff of medical benefits. This type of personal human catastrophe is being propagated not only in Fort Worth, Dallas, but in St. Louis, around the Boston area, in Los Angeles. The details of this are reported consistently and painfully to the major trade unions in which many of the working people are organized. All this constitutes an undeclared war against our own people. These people are being repressed, held down, withheld from economic opportunity. Life prospects severely reduced and no prospect of improvement. This is the consequence of a long history of major concentration of capital-type resources in the United States on behalf of a military enterprise. The military, I remind you, pay wages and salaries and make cash registers tinkle as a consequence. But the military product is bereft of any ordinary consumption or means of production use value. Hence, it is of great moment to understand the military budget as an equivalent capital fund, since when those funds are used, they set in motion what is ordinarily called in the industrial enterprise fixed or working capital. For 1987, we are able to compare with fine data assembled by United Nations statisticians the military budgets of major countries compared to the money value of the new civilian assets put in place in each of those countries. The civilian assets may be private or publicly funded, but they are in each case only civilian assets. In the United States in 1987, for every $100 of civilian assets newly put in place, separately the Department of Defense was granted $54. Mind you, that is a ratio of 54 to 100, not 54 out of 100. In the United Kingdom, it was 34 to 100. In France, 23 to 100. In Germany, 19 to 100. In Japan, 4 to 100. The dramatic difference in the uses of capital-type resources between Germany, Japan, and the United States spells a powerful explanation of the difference in productivity and quality of development in industry and infrastructure in those societies compared to ours. There are no comparable reliable data for the Soviet Union, for which I have nothing more than an opinion, an estimate for which I cannot even begin to suggest a possible error of estimate. That magnitude is probably in the order or greater than 75 to 100. In the Soviet Union, you can see that civilian industry has been worn down, as has civilian infrastructure, even while military industry factories, and I saw a number of them last August, are world-class in quality, in structures, in equipment, in classes of personnel, in tooling, in availability of raw materials, equipment, devices of all sorts. The consequences from this are far-reaching, not only with respect to the conditions of daily life, but they affect the underpinnings of a modern industrial economy. Thus, it is of great moment that from 1977 to 1987, there were the following reductions in the production worker force in a series of machinery-producing industries. These are crucial because these are industries that produce the means of production. The absence of capability for producing means of production is a hallmark of economic underdevelopment. That's one of the ways of defining an undeveloped country. It depends on others for the means of production. So, from 1977 to 87, the machine tool industry lost 50% of its production workers. There was no 50% increase in productivity. There was rather a shutdown of factories wholesale in the Northeast and in the Midwest. In rolling mill machinery, 60% were gone. In turbines and turbine generator sets, 43% gone. In internal combustion engines, 32% of the workforce gone. In farm machinery and equipment, mind you, we still have an enormous agriculture industry. 60% of production workers gone. That means constant increased dependence on importation of agricultural machinery. Motors and generators, 24% gone. Construction machinery, 42% gone. Mining machinery, 60% gone. Oil and gas field equipment, 68% gone. Textile machinery, 43% gone. There's no escaping the point that what we see here is evidence of pervasive economic undevelopment as an ongoing process. This was summarized, all of this, very aptly by Dwight Eisenhower while in the White House, as he addressed on April 1953, the North American Society of Newspaper Editors. Eisenhower stated, quote, "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired, signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children." This is the kind of process of deterioration which lies behind the mass of statistical data, ably summarized by Professor Marcuson. And it's what underlies the decay in the machinery producing and other industries of the United States. And it underlies what is now the prospect of an economic no future for millions of our own people. The unwillingness to even debate economic conversion and disarmament now puts the U.S. at high risk of succumbing finally to social pathologies of the gravest sort, as people on a large scale are left hopeless, and finally, if not given a way to act rationally for correction of problems, are prone to seeking out demagogic magic helpers. At the present time, the House of Representatives hopper contains House Resolution 441. That bill sets forth a method for economic conversion planning that has the following characteristics. It is highly decentralized, with authority and responsibility in each military-serving factory, base, and laboratory. It requires advanced planning for redesign of enterprise on the contingency of the military work being completed. There are no subsidies to the management in this proposal. At its core is the proposal for setting up alternative use committees in every one of the important military-serving factories, bases, and laboratories. These alternative use committees, named 50% by management and 50% by the working people, would have the responsibility of laying out a redesign. So, as I noted to the people of Fort Worth a month ago, had the Weiss bill been in place the previous 2 years, then the cancellation of that contract by the Secretary of Defense would have made it possible for someone in the Office of General Dynamics to open the appropriate file drawer, and there in front would be folder number 1, and it would say Week 1, with detailed plans of what to do to set in motion the process of conversion to civilian work, all of which had been given substantial thought and detailed care during the previous 2 years. Who opposes alternative use committees and the Allied redesign plan? It is opposed by the top managers of the Pentagon for reasons that are perfectly obvious, as this would entail less dependency on their largesse and the opportunity for independent and decentralized decision-making. It is opposed by the top echelon of the White House. After all, the president is functionally the chief executive officer of the largest management in the country, centered in the Pentagon. It is opposed by the top management layer of the main military-serving firms. And why shouldn't they oppose it? Where else could they possibly get a guaranteed market that pays for the goods before they are delivered, that pays out for changes in design when defects are found, that finances research and development with an open hand, that makes it virtually impossible for the major firms to go into bankruptcy? So much for free market in that sphere. There is a challenge here, and maybe the nature of that challenge is further underscored when we understand that only a year ago, the relevant committee of the Supreme Soviet in Moscow examined Russian language translation of the Economic Conversion Bill as now presented by Ted Weiss and then available in the previous Congress. Alternative use committees for the Soviet Union were opposed by the Gosplan, the State Planning Committee, by the military ministries, by the top managers of the military serving firms, and by the generals of the Red Army. Exactly the same lineup that appears in the United States. And that conflict with respect to economic conversion planning is what lies at the core of the present great policy dispute in the Soviet Union. Mind you, there are important issues to be dealt with respect to sources of capital and the like. And for that, there are imaginative proposals by diverse persons. We can recall that it was a Republican president who saw to the establishment of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation in the federal government, which saw to it that major firms, major economic activities continued being operable and would not halt for want of a shortage of reasonable financing. A colleague at Columbia University, John Rinn, has prepared a proposal for ESOP development, leaning on the bill that is already law and widely used in the United States for employee stock ownership plans, and carrying out as well a function of an economic conversion financing bank. There is another side to economic conversion, just as there is another side to the same coin. And that side is the reversal of the arms race, disarmament. The odds are very strong that few, if any of you, have ever seen President Kennedy's proposal for carrying out negotiated, agreed international disarmament in 10 years, in 3 stages, 3 years, 3 years, 4 years, proposed by President Kennedy at a press conference on April the 18th, 1962, and essentially thereafter put down the memory hole in American public life. We in the National Commission for Economic Conversion and Disarmament are committed to attempting to place economic conversion and disarmament on the public table for widespread discussion. We propose that near term there be hearings, a year in duration, on both economic conversion and on disarmament. The Labor and Commerce Committees of the Congress dealing with economic conversion, the Foreign Relations Committee of the House and the Senate dealing with disarmament. By doing this, there would be a beginning, at least a beginning, of a vision, a serious prospect in the United States for a future that is not a procession of more Gulf-type wars. This act would also have a major consequence, and that is, of course, the reason why it will not happen easily. It will set the agenda for the 1982 elections. I can think of no more 1992 elections. I can think of no more constructive prospect for American public life than for the 1992 elections to be a contest around the question which party and which persons are best suited to design and carry out economic conversion and disarmament. Thank you.